For me, friendship is not something that is rooted in the good times. It actually comes to the fore in the bad times. And this was a bad time. This was a deeply challenging time. And when he talks about us having prayed together, we have snotty, dribbling, screaming, wailing prayed together over this stuff because it was hard.
Well, it's clear you're building something rooted in deep values, and obviously we talk about legacy here and creating a legacy. And just listening to this friendship rooted in faith, rooted in values, David, if I could ask you a question, can you share with us a time that Nate was there for you when you were going through a difficult time and how he helped you?
I've mentioned one of the profound moments where he did that thing that I think Nate briefly mentioned, the there can only be one syndrome, which is very prevalent whenever there's a marginalized group. It's very prevalent around black men, and certainly around black people in Hollywood. Once there is a Denzel, that can almost mean that there's no space for anyone else. Once there's an Obama, once there's a Dr. King. I think one of the challenging things for the movement was once he was murdered, assassinated, who's next? If you haven't created a culture where it's a phalanx, where it's a community, where it's a many-headed monster, so that when you cut one head off, there's plenty more there to do the work, that is incredibly detrimental to a community. And it is self-sabotaging to celebrate the there can only be one syndrome. So in that moment where Nate not only demonstrated, but actively put himself to the side in order to demonstrate that this is not a there can only be one friendship or atmosphere, that has been incredibly impactful to me, because that's my disposition. That's my aspiration. I grew up in the theatre in the UK, and that is the only way you get a play going. It cannot be that there is one person. It's just too much of a community endeavor. So one of the things I will point to, when we did Red Tails together, and our backgrounds, as you can probably tell, very, very different. And Nate came from, as he said, an environment where it's get the money, he didn't have, like I was very blessed to have, a father there to help with his raising. He came from a more challenged background than me. And what happens with that is that when you get into a space like George Lucas is producing a film called Red Tails with this group of young black actors that no one else knows, he could easily have, and he was the lead in that film. And what happened on that film was that, to be perfectly frank, there were those of us in that group, or there were some folks who had bought into there can only be one syndrome. And I remember feeling very on the outs as a result, because I didn't subscribe to that mindset. I felt it was going to be detrimental to the experience and to the film itself. And I spoke to Nate about it because we were playing best friends in the film, and he shared my opinion about it. And one of the beautiful things that I remember this, we gathered the cast together. And this was early on in our relationship. So, I didn't quite know which way it was going to go. And I remember Nate he's much calmer now than he was when we first met. And Nate being very he was quite rightly upset by it. I sort of have always had a sort of calmer demeanor. But his passion infected me, and I think my calmer approach. And we stood there together, and we talked to this group of young men, and it was the moment beyond which, it was the first time we were effective as as a team, as a partnership. And I've never had that before. I had never had someone who was such a kindred spirit, despite being so different from me. And so, to your question, he gave me a renewed sense of purpose around that which I feel I'm here to do, which is to gather people with a common goal towards something greater than all of us. And I'd never really had a partner in that who looks like me and who and this is an important one, respect. Like, I respect his talent. I respect his perspective. I respect the way he moves through the world. And so that was a gift he gave me in that moment. And it's never really abated since. And it has helped me with my sense of self and my sense of purpose.
David, 8 years ago, your friendship faced one of its greatest challenges when an allegation from college that Nate had been acquitted for resurfaced. And he faced very public backlash for how he responded. You stood firmly by his side and became an advocate for second chances. How have you seen Nate grow and change since then?
Yeah, that moment 8 years ago surrounding Birth of a Nation and these allegations, it was incredibly challenging to see someone you know very well going through something as painful as that, something as targeted as that. But also, like I said just before, I have watched Nate from when we first met, certainly to now and even to then, evolve enormously as a human being. And the reality is, and I say this happily now, who Nate was as a 19-year-old, I don't know that we would be best friends back then. And that's not only to do with who Nate might have been back then, but who I was back then. And yet here we are, and he is like a brother to me. So I'm talking about the evolution and the growth that we go through, and I have watched him grow. So in that moment, I remember talking to Nate when all of this was happening, and understandably, incredibly challenging for him. And we've talked about this since, that some of how Nate reacted is stuff that he regrets. Some of what I had to say at that time took time to hear. And that, to me, is the stuff that people don't see. You know, we live in an echo chamber of social media and news cycles and almost carnivorously feeding off of people and their pain and their circumstances. And I know what that looks like. I know what that looks like even on Selma, when we were being accused of inaccuracies tied to the film, and that actually the Selma March was Lyndon Johnson's idea, not your father or the movement's idea. I've seen how people during award season have tried to sling mud in ways that are self-seeking and self-serving. That's the industry. That's the industrial complex that is the press, that is the industrial complex that is the news cycle. But this is a human being. This is a human being who I know. And so it wasn't difficult for me at all to advocate for him, because I know him. I know him. And I know he's fallible. And I see his evolution. And I see that in him which I know flies in the face of what people are saying. So for me, friendship is not something that is rooted in the good times. It actually comes to the fore in the bad times. And this was a bad time. This was a deeply challenging time. He had made a film that I truly feel was designed and on its way to having the kind of social impact that was indisputable, and that got derailed. And we've talked about this a lot. Since then, we've done a bunch of work together because there were mistakes made. There were mistakes made in terms of disposition. There were attitudes that Nate had in the past at that time, even, that we had to work through. And when he talks about us having prayed together, we have snotty, dribbling, screaming, wailing prayed together over this stuff because it was hard. And there's so much that this will not be able to give context to. All I can say to you is that this is a man worthy of redemption. This is a man worthy of the platform that he had and, God willing, will continue to have. And this is a man who I have seen evolve and grow in ways tied to not only humility, but also real dark night of the soul stuff. Like, he talks about the fact that he's a very private person. And I invited him here today. We had to pray over this. We debated long and hard about this because this is not easy for him in the wake of all of that. And so, I say all that to say that I know this man. And for me, there is never hesitancy on the basis of what I know and what I see, because he's a truly beautiful human being. Sorry. We all make mistakes, We all make mistakes. We've all made mistakes. Nate has made his mistakes. But he, more than almost anyone else I have encountered, has stepped into a place of ownership of who he was, some of which is to do with environment, cultural whatever it may be. But this is a man who is worthy of grace. That's all I'll say. And that's why I never feel any hesitation to shout from the rooftops my friendship with him, my advocacy for him, my love for him, because he's a beautiful human being.
Thank you, brother.
What is the most profound insight or lesson that you've gained through the challenges and growth you've experienced?
I'd say the most valuable lesson I've learned over the last 8 years, if not in my life now, it's been to make room for empathy in every situation, in every circumstance, no matter the backstory, and that you can't have empathy if you're not listening. That was the thing. When I constantly thank David for his friendship, it's that part, I was so caught up in what I felt was being done to me, and my innocence, and what I was losing, what I felt I had to lose. I didn't recognize the impact that the situation had on so many other people, the epidemic of that situation, how it impacts so many people we know, how it impacted fans, friends, family members. And it was really David that became a voice of reason for me, and really encouraged me to be still, because sometimes you're in this energy of this isn't fair, it's and that's not leadership. I don't think I could call myself a leader. When you think about the people I've had the pleasure of being able to play, we've talked about it on this podcast. Everyone was service. So how can I be of service to the people that I feel like I've been called to impact through my art, through my work, my family? Empathy and listening. David encouraged me to be still, to listen earnestly. We did a lot of listening. Went and talked to a lot of people, to reflect quietly rather in public spaces, to really get into spaces where I can reflect on what I was listening to and how it impacted not just me but those around me, and then really back to constantly praying for wisdom and discernment. I think that's the thing that grounds you constantly, that you do not live in an echo chamber, that in this moment, the people who have followed you, the people who have supported you, are expecting a more thoughtful response. And then finally, and this is really important, to really look for opportunities for growth in focused accountability. Where can I show up and say, that I needed to learn, this I need to learn, this needs to become a part of my growth as a man, this needs to be challenged with respect to what I've been taught about manhood or growth. And these are things that I'm not 19 anymore, I'm 45, but these are things that even on a podcast like this, or even in future projects I do, or conversations that aren't public, can really have an impact on the constructs that we have inherited as artists, as human beings. It says, in the Bible, a good person leaves an inheritance for their children's children. What is the inheritance we're leaving? And the inheritance I want to leave is not a disposition of anger and frustration, regardless of what I deem to be my perspective of my innocence or what happened, but the impact that all the actions, behaviors, and cultures that we are walking around steeped in have on those around us.
We started this conversation talking about your 5 daughters. Mm-hmm. I'm sure that also had a tremendous impact of growth over the last 8 years. And it's nothing like a child. And you have 5, so I'm sure that's 5 different personalities. We have one that has 5 different personalities. And they will ask you things, and they will kind of hold your feet to the fire.
Absolutely.
One of the things we did soon after this happened is we went on a tour of talking to lots of different women. And I called up friends, people who were more acquaintances. We spoke to experts in the space as it pertains to just what women have had to endure, in ways that the empathy that Nate is talking about was something that I grew in, because we are also living in an environment that, as it pertains to women, as a man, you take a lot for granted in relation to the effect that is being had in these spaces. And so when I talk about his evolution, it's tied to my evolution, is that we literally, it's been 8 years, and there's a lot we could have done to sort of, what's Nate's comeback? And actually, it's work. There's just the work. What's the work? The work is empathy, as you've already said. The work is understanding. The reason I wanted to link my arms with him and go on that journey is I found there are massive holes in my knowledge and my empathy as well, because of the things that we take for granted. We're here as black men talking about the things that we've been denied and the things that we are fighting for, but I think I'm right in saying we had a blind spot. And it took me partnering with my best friend to go, okay, this is not about let's get the next movie going or whatever. This is a journey. And I'm committed to you to go on this with you because it's a difficult one. And there were doors I could open in terms of, like people who had real resistance to sitting down with Nate, to going, no, do me a solid. Sit down with him because he needs to hear what you have to say. And without naming names, it's the gamut of people you didn't know, I didn't know very well, to people you did who felt, real hurt in the wake of all of this. And it's been an extraordinary journey to go on that we don't feel the need to publicize because, in all honesty, if it's true, if it worked, if it's real, it will manifest in our children. Mm-hmm. It will manifest in our work. It will manifest in our character. And that speaks louder than anything that we have to say or he has to say. And so that's why I remain in partnership with him on the business side, as a friend, as artists, because I know there is real richness that has come through this challenge that is going to, God willing, be beneficial and edifying as we continue to forge forward as partners in everything that we're doing together.
Mm-hmm. You speak of, if it's true, it'll manifest in our children. I love that. You talked a lot about empathy, about growth. And David, when I look at your own family, you have 4 children. Mm-hmm. You have spoken beautifully about how you were in partnership with Jessica mm-hmm. and how they ground you. Mm-hmm. And so what do you hope your legacy will be when your kids think about you? What will they say, not only as a father, but as a human being?
Well, it's what I just said. I have learned that with children, it's not what you say, it's what you do. And the amazing moments are when you see them modeling behavior that you didn't even really recognize or realize. Hopefully it's the good stuff, yes. That they were paying attention.
Yes.
And, my wife and I have a 2-week rule when we're never apart for more than 2 weeks. And that was something we instituted because ours is a very challenging profession for marriages, and you're on set with some of the most beautiful people on the planet, and you're away for months, and that's just not conducive for a marriage and a relationship. So it's in my contract. I will either on the 13th day be on my way back to my wife, or you've got to figure out getting her to me. And my older kids, 2 of them are out of the house now, but they check in. They go, it's day 13. What's happening with you guys? Is mommy on the way to you, or are you on the way back?
They keep you honest.
I've seen so many other actors model the 2-week rule since Jess and I very naively, getting married at the age of 20 and 22. And I remember just before we got married, we were apart for like 3 weeks, and I was ill, like physically ill from being apart from her. And I went, we're never doing that again. And so we instituted the 2-week rule. We had reps, agents, managers laugh at us at the notion that would be something we would be able to continue. I then, years following, in instances where I insisted upon it, have had producers sidle up to me and said, you know what, if I had thought more about my marriage the way you do, I might still be married. And that's in a professional capacity. So to see our kids going, what's happening with the 2-week rule, you guys, is something that is so beautiful. Because to be perfectly frank, one of the best pieces of advice I got about marriage is the marriage is the center, the kids are a welcome addition. Because that gives them security to be kids. They are not the reason you're together. They are not the glue. They don't have to bear the burden of, well, if I'm not here, mommy and daddy are not going to be together. Now, the love I have for my wife, God willing, that is what they are going to aspire to in their life partner, and what will get generationally passed down to my descendants, which is that love is to be fought for. You know, the 2-week rule it's a fight to maintain that in an industry where you're constantly away. But, you know, to some people, it might seem not that romantic, the notion of a 2-week rule. But I remember doing a film in Morocco, and it was 24 hours of travel each way back to LA. And I flew it took 24 hours to get from Morocco to LA to be with my wife for 36 hours before I turned around again and flew 24 hours to get back to set. And my kids have never forgotten that. So that's not a saying thing, that's a doing thing. And hopefully I'm modeling for them what it is to have sacrificial love within your marriage. Because to me, that's what Jesus is, that's what he represents, that is the zenith, the pinnacle, the red hot eye of what he did on the cross, was sacrificial love. So as many ways as I can exhibit that in my marriage, in my work, with my friendships, that's what I hope will be the legacy for my children in terms of how they go on to model that behavior going forward.
Nate, are there any particular stories that you could think of seeing David as a parent that could give us just a little bit of a glimpse of him?
And I don't think it's a small thing. I don't even think I've talked to him. Maybe my wife, maybe Sarah, but it is a wonderful thing to see one of David's children ask him for something, and to see him become the dad and considerate when he knows he's going to give it to them, but the way in which he thinks about it before he responds. I don't even know if you do this. And I can only assume you get it from your father. I've been in the house, Daddy, yes. And they come and they ask him, he goes, as if to measure if they deserve it or not. And just, it is the cutest. Like that relation as a father of 5 girls. And in that respect, it doesn't matter if it's, I'm not going to say your children's name, I don't know, but the boys or the girl. But I just love seeing you contemplate and eye them for a moment and then give them what they've asked for, and to see them wait for it. To be on the outside looking in, and it's just the way you do it. It always makes me smile because it's to kind of speak to what you spoke to, presence, visibility, seeing your children, having spiritual contact. There's nothing fleeting and there's nothing flipped. That's one thing we have in common. You ask me a question, you're going to get an answer. And if you get no answer, that's an answer, and you know why. It is the one thing that growing up where I came from, your yes is your yes, your no is your no. You look people in the eye. If you're staying or if you're leaving, if you're hired or if you look someone in the eye. And we bring that to our children. Can you look at this drawing? Yes. What is the drawing? There. David is like that with all of his, it's beautiful to watch. But when they ask him for something that they don't know that they're going to get, and he just takes a second and he goes, okay. And then they go off and they get it. It is I don't know if you know, you probably do it intentionally.
No, I do, because it's about making sure that you are acknowledging that the relationship is not flip. It's not just okay, Daddy, because you know what kids are like. They'll time it. They'll time to where you're distracted, and so that you can just whatever.
Not David.
Go to the no, because my interactions with my kid, it's about intention. It's about eye contact. Yep. It's about you cannot say I love you enough. Yeah. Because words are powerful. Yeah. And I think you're saying I love you by the fact that regardless of whether I give you this thing or not, you need to know that love is part of the equation regardless, whether it's a no or a yes. I'm looking at you to make sure it's not a flip yes or a flip no. Because again, what you're modeling for your kids is relationship. The thing that I get so much joy from is when it's a no and they can come back, maybe not the same day, maybe not the next day, but they can go, thank you for saying no. I didn't really need that thing. Because your kids are constantly testing you.
That's right.
They're constantly testing where are the boundaries, because the boundaries is what makes them feel safe. So if you say yes to everything, they actually are losing a sense of their boundaries and their sense of self and their sense of safety.
That's right.
So the moment that I'm kind of annoyed that you spotted is measuring, and I know my kids, whether it's something you need or something you want. And I'm there to provide your needs, not your wants. And so it's that as well. And sometimes I'll give you what you want, but just know that's not going to be an all the time, everyday thing. So it's about intention and it's about connection, I think is the point.
But now, David, have you learned anything in particular about raising daughters?
Nate and I, because we run a business together, we're on the phone a lot together. We're on a lot of Zooms. And the thing I admire the most about him is, similarly, no matter who we're talking to, if it's the CEO, if it's a potential financier, whatever it is, when one of his daughters comes into the room on a Zoom, excuse me, you guys, yes, honey? And he will never ignore them. He will never do that. I've never known him to do that. And it is so beautiful because you can see the faces of the squares. Everyone just goes, everyone just has that smile of this guy has his priorities in check. And sometimes you forget to push the mute button. And it always ends with I love you.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Always ends with I love you. No matter what it is, no matter how trivial or important the thing they came to ask was, it always ends with I love you. And then he's back to the Zoom. And to be perfectly frank, much like the 2-week rule, in that business setting, I actually think it's incredibly impactful for people in a business setting to have the priorities put in the right place. Of like, all this stuff we're doing, at the end of the day, nothing is more important than that. And because I have to say, I'm not that way in the Zoom. On the Zoom, I'm the one who
just give me a second. You know what it is with daughters? It's so different, As you say, children test you for boundaries. They also test you for hierarchy. They want to know where they sit in your life.
Oh, wow, yeah.
Constantly.
Oh, wow.
In daughters, I have from my youngest to my eldest, I literally have one in every different level of education. So I have one in elementary school, one in middle school, one in high school, one in college, and one getting a master's. And they are constantly asking me, in different ways, where do I sit in your life? Where do I sit amongst my sisters? Where do I sit in this moment? Your colleagues. And so my job, I feel as a father, to always remind them that they are as close to me as anyone or anything on earth. And that means in a Zoom, literally turning and saying, yes, I will hear your poem and listen to the poem while we're closing the deal. And I will say, I love that poem. I'm going to finish my call, and then we're going to talk about it. I love you. Goodbye. I lose nothing, but I gain everything. And she gains everything. Because maybe it wasn't about the poem. She will leave the room saying, I am important. And I'm important enough that in this moment he chose me, because that's what it's about. We are in a time where the choosing, whether it be of partners, whether it be of relationships, has become very difficult with social media and all these things that are constantly negotiating likes, negotiating self-esteem. And I also say I try my best to treat all my children like they're only children. Because I learned early on that when you take 2 to Disneyland, it doesn't count. It just doesn't. If you take 3 out to dinner, it doesn't count. It's not a date. That's a group.
Yeah, I learned that from you.
Yeah, right?
I learned the daddy-daughter date from. I mean, I only have one daughter. You literally came to my house last week with Justice, and he had forgotten his bag at my house because we spent the day together. So he had to come back a couple of days later. You came with your daughter Justice, and they were going out for lunch, for dinner together. Yep. And I was like, wow, because I do that with my daughter. And that's kind of easier when you have one daughter and you have 3 sons. It's like the daddy-daughter day is like, of course, it's a dad. But the fact that you do that, I was so impressed with that, because you specifically brought her to get the bag, knowing that it was her day. It's her day. And I've been around Justice a lot. I have never seen her that effervescent and giddy and just happy. And she, I have a bunch of dogs in my house. She's petting the dog, she's dancing, and I could tell it's because you had singled the day for her that day. And the way she skipped out of the house, knowing that you guys were going off to dinner. Yeah. But that I learned from you. I didn't know how prioritized that needed to be. And my sexism lies firmly in the fact that I do treat my daughter differently than my sons. I don't know if it's right or not, but I was one of 3 boys. Then I had 3 boys. Then, oh my Lord, I had a daughter, which is the thing where I go, you have 5. The effect this girl has on my heart should be illegal. I mean, it is just so seeing her. It's like my heart is being rebroken every time. And so to see how you have navigated being able to treat them all as a only child in that way has been really exemplary for me.
I cry all the time now. It's funny, when where I come from, to cry, there's punishment with that. What are you crying for? I give you something to cry about, It's a Southern thing, right? Right?
You laugh too much at that one.
Right? And so I found myself in my older age, specifically around my daughters, I cry for nothing at all. My daughter lost her front tooth, and she showed it to me. Why is Daddy crying? And I'm like, I'm not sad, but it's we don't get these moments back. It's we're getting older, and it's happening fast. We're here. It says it's but a mist, a vapor, and then it's gone. So I'm in a season of absolute and unapologetic investment into those girls, into my family, into my life, because before we know it, someone's going to be having a podcast and we're going to be gone, and they're going to be talking about the stuff that we did, hopefully in positive ways. But at that point, it won't matter to us. We'll be somewhere else.
So, David, this whole podcast is inspired by a book that we've co-authored called What is My Legacy? And part of your legacy is your philanthropic work, especially in Nigeria, which has inspired us. Can you briefly tell us a little bit about that work and some amazing work you're doing, especially with scholarships?
Yeah, the leadership scholarship we have in Nigeria was inspired by the Bring Back Our Girls movement that happened just under a decade ago, when the Chibok girls were kidnapped in northern Nigeria. And what happened in that moment, it became a viral moment. Bring Back Our Girls became a hashtag. Over 200 girls had been kidnapped. But Boko Haram, the terrorist group who had done this, they specifically their goal was to make sure girls are not educated. And that tells you something. That tells you that there is power in the education of girls specifically. I'm also an ambassador for an organization called Girl Rising, and studies have been done to show that the way to end world poverty is to educate girls globally. And when you think about something as lofty as ending world poverty, it just feels insurmountable. But if you can educate one girl and have her consider the notion of leadership as part of her legacy, that's a very real drop in the ocean of ending world poverty. So I partnered with a foundation called GENCO to start the David Oyelowo Leadership Scholarship. And long story short, we now have 45 girls who we're paying for all of their education We find girls who have been dealing with terrorism or socioeconomic marginalization, all of these patriarchy, which is as much as I love being Nigerian, it's a very patriarchal society that traditionally can often marginalize women and stymie their opportunities. So that to me is unacceptable. A lot of it, we've talked about my daughter ad nauseum, but a lot of it was inspired by having a girl all of a sudden and realizing, oh my gosh, do I have a blind spot? Because suddenly I have a person in my life where the idea that their gender would be the reason why they would not be afforded every opportunity, unacceptable to me. So our leadership scholarship is a means of doing that, and we are in 4 states in Nigeria right now. We've partnered with schools in those 4 states to basically have the best we can find who would not otherwise get the education they deserve, and plant them in these schools where we will pay for not only their education, but the thing that we really learn is mental health, because they're coming out of very difficult situations. So we're paying for that component as well. And
is there a website for people to learn more?
Yes,
about getting involved?
geneco.org, and everything's GEANCO.org, and it's a foundation, and they can find all the information there.
Thanks. Thank you for sharing.
Thank you.
I love that, because as Coretta Scott King said, that if the soul of this nation is to be saved, then women must become the soul.
Absolutely.
And I think that can be said around the world.
For sure. For sure.
And then, of course, you have a wonderful Apple TV series.
Yeah, Government Cheese is about a family of 4 in the Valley in the late 1960s, and I play a bit of a ne'er-do-well who's just come out of prison and is trying to do right by his family, but he has these encounters with God. So it's a surrealist, parabolic comedy, and he's a man who's trying to get back on the straight and narrow, trying to do God's will, but really being pulled back into his past. And the question of the show is, can he become worthy of his wife and children all over again, which is the path that God is trying to get him back onto. But, I'm really, really proud of that show, because it's set in the 60s, where we know, certainly at this table we know, we were dealing with a lot of strife and unrest as black people, but it doesn't touch on that. It's just a beautiful celebration of a black family at a time and a place that we very rarely see on TV, and it's a half-hour comedy, and I'm just really proud that we got it made.
And it's very fun. We don't always get to have fun, especially in the 60s. So definitely check it out. Definitely check it out.
Tell me about it. Amen
Beautiful,
to that.
beautiful.
Yes.
Well, gentlemen, I love the laughter. I think it's a beautiful note to end on, because we put together this, the 4 of us, originally because we wanted to invite people to have conversations about legacy, to listen, to learn, and yes, to have a lot of fun. And I think back at the conversation of how we live legacy. I love the 2-week rule. I want to shamelessly steal that.
Oh, please, and it's yours.
Thank you. Well, I think we want to bring it into our lives. I want to talk to my wife about that one. I love the idea of you cannot be what you cannot see. I think it's deeply powerful, but it's also a great call to action for role models out there.
Yes.
I love your conversation about consult God before consulting the ego. Nate, your tribute that you gave to David, I thought was beautiful. And I'm actually going to repeat that one again. Consult God before consulting the ego, because that is profound. I love the idea you cannot say I love you too much. And it fits so beautifully on what both of you have said, which is, where do I sit? And always reminding kids that they are our priorities, our family, our spouses, our loved ones. And so I look at all of these beautiful calls to action that you gave us today, of how each person can see how the 2 of you shape your legacy, how you live your legacy every day. So on behalf of the 4 of us, we're deeply grateful. David, Nate, thank you for taking the time to share your legacies with us today.
Thank you.
I want to salute you all, and I have never done this in this way before, because we always say to our daughter, Yolanda, real queens straighten each other's crowns. And this is the first time I've said that you all embody real kings straighten each other's crowns. So thank you all for straightening each other's crowns.
Thank you forever. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us. We are so grateful to have you as part of this journey. If you enjoyed today's conversation, subscribe and share the podcast with friends, family, and loved ones, and follow us on social media at My Legacy Movement. My Legacy podcast is available on the iHeartRadio app or wherever you get your podcasts. Until next time, may you find connection and inspiration to live your most fulfilled life.